because sometimes I feel like the reason I do this is I feel like 5 years later, a reasonable human being, which I would say all of you are reasonable, will only remember so much. And so I like us to at least remember the overview. So hold on, we're coming in here. Gotta move our ab model over. So, yeah.
Has that tree always been coming out behind that whiteboard?
Yes, sir. Actually, it has. I was trying to think of something funny to say, but yes, it's always been like that. It was done by a student who dropped my course. I was just talking to one of the labs about this today. I had a student who was a magnificent human being, seemed polished and together, and he is polished and together. You would love him, delightful human being. When it came time for clinicals to work on the public, he was so overwhelmed with the possibility of not being perfect that he dropped the course. But anyway, because he was so good, this guy was really good, by the way, but he couldn't be 99%. That wasn't good enough for him. He just really, really was overwhelming. I was like, dude, you got to get used to being like, it's okay. But anyway, but he came around this class. He asked me permission first, but he's like, it's so drab in here. And so he put up little leaves around this thing. If you look inside the classroom, there's leaves around the door. If you look in Mr. Ibarra's lab, there's black leaves up by the clocks. He did all that stuff. And it just really did kind of spruce the place up a little bit. So anyway, yes, it's been there, sir. It's been there for a couple of years.
It's nice.
It is nice, yeah. I wish he would have never left. Such a good guy. All right. That goes triple for you guys. If one of you leaves, I swear to God, I'll stalk you. Bring you back. I will make you graduate. Okay, so let's talk about this. So there's a couple of big concepts that are so much more important than the words we're going to use here soon. There are some definitions that you need to know. There really are, and they're important, and there's some that we use every day as a massage therapist, but there's some concepts too. So I want to talk about the basic concept of your heart and what it does and what happens after it does what it does. So let's make a heart. Can we see that kind of? So I actually made a real heart. I mean a real, heart shape there. Very poorly, but I did. Because it's a very easy way to show what the heart does. So this is actually somebody's heart. So believe it or not, this would be a person facing you. By the way, I know the heart doesn't look like this. Although you'd be surprised, by the way, it has a little bit of a V shape on the bottom. But the fact is it basically doesn't look like this. Yes, Miss McDowell.
Sorry, just real quick, I think that they do the heart shape like that because it's two hearts stitched together. Just a little thing. I've seen a picture of that. Sorry.
You mean you think they make that shape because of stitching two hearts together?
Yeah, if you put two of them together, they actually make the, that shape.
Really?
Mr. Honor knows what I'm talking about. Thank you.
Really? I don't know. I'm pretty suspicious of you and Miss Trotter anyway. All right, I'll think about it. Cool. So this heart, just to let you guys know, that's the right side because that's the client's right side. That's the left side because that's the client's left side. It just makes it less, it just gets very confusing for people. All right. And your heart is a 4-chambered pump. Most pumps that you deal with in the real world, believe it or not, are only single-chamber pumps. Your entire heart, by the way, everybody look at your fist really quick. That's your heart. It's about that size. It's not very big when you think about the fact that it's pumping out liters and liters and liters of blood. In fact, when you see the main aorta that comes out of the heart, it's about the size of a garden hose. And so to have a garden hose coming off a little pump like this, it's bigger around than this, is amazing. That pump has to really work efficiently. And by the way, there are other animals that have a 1-chamber or a 2-chamber heart and aren't as nearly as efficient as you guys are. You guys have a very efficient heart. And there's a reason you do. So, the concept of this heart is it's got priming pumps on it. And I'll explain what that is in a second. But the priming pumps are the atrium. These guys up here are called atrium, or atria, but anyway, sorry. And these are ventricles. So, that's your right atrium, that's your right ventricle. That's your left atrium, that's your left ventricle. And the atrium to your heart, their job is to prime the pumps to make them work better. So most pumps, one of the big problems that most pumps have is that they don't fill up, all the way. And then when they pump, they don't pump out all the way. And so, let's see. Let me see if I can explain this. And by the way, these are just atria. Sorry. Atria is just one. All right. So what happens is blood from your entire body enters into the right atrium, or atria. It enters into there. And what I mean from your entire body, this is spent blood. It is dark in color because it's had most of the oxygen taken out of it. When your blood has oxygen taken out of it, it gets very dark blue. It's really a dark red, but it looks dark. Anyway, dark. And it's coming from your toes, from your nose, from your ears, from your arms, and it's been used up. And all of the stuff coming from your lower body, all the stuff coming from your upper body eventually dumps in up here. Later we're going to learn about your lymphatic system. It dumps in up there too. But don't worry about that yet. So this right atria's job is to fill up the right ventricle. So it actually pumps, and its job is to fill this guy up completely. Because the ventricles are the ones that do the big pumping job, and we want them very full. When you have a heart that's this size, if it doesn't pump properly, you're just not going to get enough blood around your body. It's not a very big pump. It's really quite impressive. It's also impressive that it's been doing this since the day you were born, before you were born. 24 hours a day. Sometimes it's doing this. Other times it's doing this. But it's never doing this. So, for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, your heart's been beating. And that atria, the right one, has been picking blood up from your body and using it to fill the right ventricle. Once the right ventricle is full of this blood that is oxygen depleted, it doesn't have a lot going on with it right now, it's kind of lacking luster, it goes off here to the lungs. Oh, jeez, let's try that again. Yeah. Now, by the way, you've got lungs on both sides. It goes to both sides. But it goes off to the lungs. And it's going off to the lungs to get rid of CO2, which is toxic for your body, and to pick up oxygen. All this happens in your lungs. Your lungs are where you exchange gas with the outside world. And they do this with surface area too. We'll talk about that later. But your lungs have lots of tiny little sacs in them that act like folds, like some of the stuff in your intestines. And your lungs actually have actually, if you unfolded your lungs entirely and laid them out flat, your little lungs, think about this for a second, they would cover roughly a tennis court. Thank you. This that is the expression I wanted on somebody's face. I really did, because it's about that shocking. That's how much surface area you have when you breathe in with all these little ripples and stuff in there like that to pick up air and to allow the oxygen to pass into your bloodstream and the CO2 to get out. And that's what happens. You have a gas exchange here. And so it goes off to the lungs, right? And it picks up new oxygen, and now the blood's bright red, because that's the color of blood when it hits oxygen. And that's the color you always see blood, unless you're cutting yourself in outer space. But when you cut yourself here, you're surrounded by oxygen, so your blood's bright red, no matter where you cut yourself. It comes back from the lungs, and goes into the left atria. Left atria is the same job. It's a priming pump. It's meant to fill up the left ventricle. And this left ventricle, by the way, I actually drew this fairly accurately by accident. The left ventricle is a little bit bigger. It's why people think the heart sits off a little bit to the left side. It really doesn't. It's just that it's a little bigger on that side. It's centered in your body, but it's a little bigger on this side, which makes it look like it's a little bit off to the left. Anyway, the left ventricle is the big one. Hopefully by now the left atrium has gotten oxygen-rich blood. It's pumped into the left ventricle. The left ventricle is completely full and ready for the big pump. Whoosh! And that big pump sends blood out to your entire body. Your nose, your toes, your fingers, your eyeballs, your butt, everything. Yes, Miss McDowell.
So the freshly oxygenated blood goes into the left atrium or the left ventricle?
Left atrium.
Okay.
Blood always goes into an atrium to get primed to go into the bigger ventricle. The atrium's job, the atrium are little pumps too. Like the heart is really 4 little pumps put together. But the atria, their job is to fill up the ventricles. Because if they're full, you don't want to pump when something's half full, because then it's half as efficient. Literally half as efficient. So that atria fills up the ventricle to make sure that when it pumps, the ventricle is full, and you get one good squeeze. And yes, Miss Trotter.
So what happens when an artery's clogged?
It's bad news bears.
What?
If the artery, it is really bad news bears. It depends where that artery is going. But if the artery is clogged and there's not another route to that location, whatever it's feeding dies. So it's very much like roadways. When you guys see an accident on the street, quite often you can take side streets and still get there. It just slows you down. It's not as efficient. Your heart does the same thing. Quite often a tube is clogged, and there are other tubes that somehow can kind of get around that. But there are some tubes that only feed one location, and if it's not getting blood, it's not getting life, and it's dying rapidly. So when arteries get clogged that are going to your brain, that's a stroke, and it's really bad. Parts of the brain start to rapidly die. It's why with strokes we want to respond very, very quickly, because minutes matter. But anyway, yeah, the simple answer to your question is that area is no longer connected to life. Yeah. Now, there are other bad things that can happen with clogged arteries, by the way, which is the clog can break loose. And a lot of times when the clog breaks loose, everybody, this something I was going to share later, but it doesn't matter. It's a good question. When the clog breaks loose, it usually makes it back to the right atria and the right ventricle, and usually makes it to the lungs. But the lungs have all those tiny, tiny little areas for gas exchange. That's how it can stretch out over a tennis court, but they're very tiny areas, and the clog usually gets in there, and it's called a pulmonary embolism. And when somebody has that, they tend to feel extremely short of breath, feels like they can't breathe. It's blocking their ability to pull in air, and they die from that too. So this is, sorry for the morbid discussion here, but we have to kill off somebody in every single discussion. So yeah, it's not good. Not good. Clogged arteries and clogs breaking loose is not good too in some ways. Although they sometimes do that on purpose. They give people medication to break up a clog very carefully and slowly. But anyway, yeah. Okay, so what does this mean for us? It means all sorts of things. So let's talk about some of this stuff. For one thing, it means that when you guys feel your pulse, what are you feeling? You don't have to put this in my terms, but what are you feeling when you feel your pulse?
You're feeling your heart beating, your ventricles working, the pump's going.
Mm-hmm. Which ventricle specifically?
The left one.
Yeah. Yeah. And by the way, you are feeling both. You're absolutely right. Both, usually the top of your heart, not usually, always, the top of your heart squeezes and loads the two ventricles, and then both ventricles squeeze. So one goes to the body, the other one goes to the lungs. This all happening all at once. But you are right. You are feeling your left ventricle. You are feeling your high blood pressure. And I don't mean like you have high blood pressure, but you are feeling the rush, and that's when your blood pressure is the highest. Later we'll talk about systolic and diastolic blood pressure, which is when somebody says I'm 120/90. They're talking about the pressure in their arteries before and after their heartbeats. So the 120 on top, that's the high number, is right what you were talking about, Ms. McDowell. When the left ventricle pumps and you go boosh, that's the highest blood pressure you have in your body. And that could be 120. That could be, by the way, when you're exercising, that could be much higher. On a healthy person even. It could be much higher when you're exercising. The low number, the diastolic pressure, and we will go over all this in the slides, everybody, but the low number is how much pressure is left in here after the ventricle pumps. So after that left ventricle goes whoosh, how much pressure is still left in the line? And believe it or not, most doctors care about, 99% of doctors care about that number more, the low number. Because the low number gives you an idea of how hard I'm working at rest. Right? We understand the pressure is going to be high when my heart pumps. We want it to kind of be high when my heart pumps. We want my heart to be able to pump really hard and forcefully and whoosh stuff out. But when it stops, we don't want the tubing to be so tight that it still shows very high blood pressure in there. So 120/70 actually is considered healthy blood pressure in our country. Still fairly high, by the way, compared to some people's standards. But the 70 part is your resting blood pressure, and that gives them a better idea of how clean and efficient your tubing is. Like what's happening when we're not pushing the system. Does it still flow well? So that's one of the things that happens with this. The other thing that we need to remember is this means that all veins which carry blood back to the heart eventually come here. All arteries which carry blood away from the heart come off here and go to the rest of the body. And then we should discuss a little bit about what do they do when they get there. Because we're making a big deal out of this. I'm making a big deal out of blood and everything like that. But what's the blood doing when it gets there? And it's doing several things. Blood coming from the heart comes out through, I feel like I really need something brighter. But anyway, blood coming through the heart comes out very big arteries. Those arteries branch off to smaller arteries. Those smaller arteries branch off to even smaller arteries. Those smaller arteries branch off to even smaller arteries. This goes on forever until they get down to these really tiny things called capillaries. Capillaries are very tiny. They're 1 cell thick. And that means that as plumbing goes, they actually leak. And we want them to at this point, because eventually we'd like the blood to leak out of them. And what they do is they go to your cell beds. And your cell beds are cells. Remember cells? Yeah. And they do not hook directly into the cells. I think that's kind of the thought, like they must plug right in the cell. They don't. They actually leak out in this wet environment just like they were drip irrigating a flower bed. And then your cells make a decision at that point about what delicious water they want to pick up from the flower bed and what they want to get rid of. It's very accurate. And then, by the way, your cells are like, well, I'll take some of that oxygen-rich blood, but I'm going to get rid of some of this non-oxygen-rich blood that I just stole the oxygen from. And by the way, there's some other stuff too that I'm going to dump out the window here too that I don't like either. Maybe some salts and minerals that we just don't need anymore. I've got too many of them, too much, whatever. And it dumps it out here too. And you've got capillaries over here too. And these capillaries are going back to bigger things called veins. They go to bigger things, and they all eventually connect up to a really big vein and go back to your heart. But in these capillary beds, your artery capillaries and your vein capillaries, which we all just call capillaries, sit here and actually let good blood leak out and pick up old blood and pick up old nutrients and leave new nutrients. They water the flower beds of your cells. So when you're massaging people, sometimes what you're doing is kind of opening up these beds so that things can flow in them better, right? Which is not a crazy idea. Anybody who's planted a garden knows that you till the soil. You don't sit there and plant the seeds in the hard packed soil, right? You wet it down, you till it, you get all sorts of stuff. We love worms because they dig through the soil and make little capillary beds is what they do. And the water gets down there and then the plant decides what it needs to pick up. It needs to be present in the soil though, right? It needs to be present in the water in the soil, otherwise we're in big trouble. So your heart has to bring all this stuff. And remember, by the way, your heart's not just a messenger carrying oxygen. That's what we think of all the time. That's so true. But it's also carrying proteins, sugars, carbohydrates, all the other cool stuff we learned about. It's literally, this is snack time here. They're like, oh, smoothies, again, blood smoothies. I love blood smoothies. But these have potassium in them and some amino acids. Oh, we were going to rebuild that cell wall the other day. And now we got the stuff out here. Let's grab it. Boom. Oh, but we better get rid of this waste out here. And it dumps that out there and your heart picks it back up and takes it back and utilizes it. It is also, however, though, delivering other things like from your endocrine system. It's delivering hormones. That's where your hormones would go. They get dumped out in the bed, and the cells that are meant to react to those hormones would be like, oh, got another message from Tab Scott. We better raise the temperature in here, eat up the sugar, do whatever it's telling us to do. That's where the messenger system comes from. Yes, Miss McDowell.
So, are the ones, the little dudes that take the blood back, are those still capillaries?
Yes. Thank you for asking. I know it's confusing, but at the once veins get really small and once arteries get really small, they're capillaries. When they're down to that one-celled thing that kind of leaks out and picks up, they're called capillary beds. This one's coming from a vein, an artery, and this one's going to a vein to go back to the heart, but the ends are the capillaries, both sides. Okay. Yes. Little dudes. And they're essentially carrying blood cells, although they are also carrying plasma, which is just liquid, really. It's water in your blood that has all sorts of other nutrients. So your cells don't just want blood cells, actually. They want the oxygen exchange, all that kind of stuff, but they also want a lot of the other stuff that's in your plasma, which should be vitamins and nutrients and amino acids and things like that. Yeah.
Thank you.
And later, we will learn about the lymphatic system. And the only reason I'm even mentioning that right now is the lymphatic system is there to pick up stuff that's too big to get back in your capillaries. Because you do sometimes dump bulk trash out of your cell, and the capillaries are like, we can't get this in this little tube. And so there is another system that comes along and picks that up. Cool. So essentially, though, your heart is a big pump that takes blood to your lungs to get rid of CO2, because CO2 is toxic to us. When you're holding your breath, you think what you're dying for is a breath of oxygen, but what you're dying from CO2. It's actually your CO2 alarms that are going off in your body, not your lack of oxygen alarms that are going off. It's the buildup of CO2 that's actually causing you to feel like you have to take another breath. Don't get me wrong, you'd eventually need oxygen too. You'll die without it. But it's the CO2 where your body's like, we got to get the CO2 out of here. It's deadly to us. Strangely enough, it's the exact opposite for trees. right? Trees breathe in CO2, they love it all day long, and they breathe out oxygen. We are in a symbiotic relationship. The tree wants what I want what the tree wants. It's a beautiful relationship. Yeah. Yeah. Which is why we should not chop down all the trees. Yeah. Okay. So, that's just kind of like Heart 101 stuff. Now, we don't believe that we directly affect the heart by massaging people. It's underneath your rib cage. We don't ever get to it. But we do think we increase circulation in all those capillary beds, which is what we're looking to do. And we do believe that by squeezing and rubbing those capillary beds, blood flows in and out of there easier. Debris is more likely to get out of there. The area is more likely to get unstuck. The fascia stops sticking together. There's more plasma in there. It gets fluid, more supple, and things tend to stay looser longer. So we do think that's the value of massage when it comes to circulation, is that we do increase local circulation to that area. And all the studies show that too, by the way, that when you're massaging an area, that you are increasing blood flow sometimes 4 times to that area over what it would be at rest. And so in some ways, massage is allowing somebody to get increased blood flow to an area without having to exercise or anything like that. And you're helping flush out what they call toxins, but it's really just cell debris, and bring in new nutrients so the cells have something to snack on. Yeah? Yeah! Old snacking cells. All right. Okay. Should we go to the slideshow? I know you've been waiting. I know you guys get excited. All right, let's see here. Let me present this. Please feel free to continue to ask questions if you have any. This should kind of piggyback on what we were talking about and fill in some of the more technical details as we go, without going into too many, I hope, too. Okay, hopefully you can all see the slides if you need to. Okay. So, this looks like something I wrote in here, to be very honest with you. Cells cannot walk to the refrigerator for a snack, and they can't walk to the bathroom. And that, I'm sure biologists would be horrified that I'm saying this, but I think they'd also agree. Your cells are essentially vampires drinking the delicious blood that comes to them, and then they're pooping and peeing, and your blood system has to pick that stuff back up too. They really do. They have nowhere to go. So any waste they do, they dump into the tissue around them, and any food they get from picking up the tissue, the fluid in the tissue around them. And so your cardiovascular system is what connects it all together. And it really is, which is why blood is life. And nothing in your body survives without blood. For long. It'll survive for a little while, but not for long. Yeah. Okay. Super duper important, basic material, but super duper important. People will laugh at you later if you don't know this. You do need to know the difference between arteries, veins, and capillaries. Arteries carry blood away from the heart. So in general, they are red and full of delicious oxygen-rich blood, and they're full of nutrients, and they are going to places. They've got cells to see. Yeah. And arteries are going away from the heart. And they are in general full of oxygen-rich blood to go to the body. There is an exception to this. There is an artery that goes away from the heart that's not full of oxygen-rich blood. Does anybody want to take a stab? You don't have to give me the name, but when might that happen? Where you'd have an artery going away from the heart that's not full of oxygen-rich blood.
Is it the pulmonary arteries?
Yes. Thank you, Ms. Walker. This guy right here from the right ventricle is going to the lungs, right? So he's going away from the heart, so he is an artery. And he's going towards the lungs, so we call him a pulmonary artery. Pulmonary just means lungs. but he's not full of oxygen-rich blood, or she. I don't know. Anyway, but they're not full of oxygen-rich blood. They're full of depleted blood in this one instance. This is the only time the pulmonary artery going to the lungs is not full of oxygen-rich blood. And it's the one time that a vein is bringing back oxygen-rich blood to the heart, which is the pulmonary veins. Because veins are always going to the heart, so they come back from the lung right there. But in general, when we're talking about arteries, we're talking about the stuff coming off here. And in general, we're talking about veins, we're talking about the stuff going in there, coming from the rest of the body. So, veins are usually coming back to fill up again. Arteries are full and they're going away to go water things again. And capillaries are what they both terminate in the end. At the end of every tiny, tiny little artery is these capillaries. At the end of every tiny, tiny vein are these capillaries that pick back up the stuff and go back to the heart. So there's a loop every time. Every time. Now, one of the reasons why circulation is so important, by the way, is because the big pump out is fine. This guy pumps out a lot. But by the time you've pumped stuff down to your feet, down to your little toe, and it's gone through a tiny little capillary, and it's picked up by another capillary and goes into another vein, there's not a lot of pressure to get back to the heart. So venous return, we call that. Venous return is actually a challenge. Gravity is fighting my venous return. Any extra weight I have is fighting my venous return because it's got to go through all that extra tubing. And so this is one of the reasons massage therapists stroke towards the heart. I am not one of them, but this is the reason they will give you. This is the reason they will rub proximally. Because their idea is that your blood pools in your extremities and you should be rubbing back towards the heart. Because they're saying, hey, there's no problem getting the blood out. That's under high pressure. But coming back, it's hard to get back. And that's what we should always be focusing on is getting blood back to the heart. And there's some massage therapists who are very adamant about this. Again, I'm not one of them. But I would say this, if you have a choice, rub towards the heart. It'll help venous return. But my problem is that I will also rub away from the heart too, because I don't believe that we should do a takeoff and a landing every time. So I'll rub both ways. It's to me, the benefit of the first thing doesn't outweigh the next thing. But I do agree with their general logic. I just want to explain it to you because you'll meet people who'll be like, what are you doing? You're always supposed to rub towards the heart. Probably not. Anyway, so, Ms. McDowell, what are arteries?
They are the blood that's going away from the heart that is oxygenated.
Yeah, in general, yes, absolutely. And they are tubes, by the way, everybody, just so we all know, this is plumbing. It's living, breathing plumbing. It's amazing plumbing. It's plumbing that can expand and contract a little bit, but it's plumbing. These are tubes. We are not talking about anything fancy. These are tubes, yeah. And so, Ms. Trotter, what are capillaries?
They are in between the arteries and the vein?
Yeah, they're tiny little connectors. Yeah, well said. Thank you. And Mr. Placencia, what are veins?
Veins move blood towards the heart, usually oxygen depleted.
Yes, perfectly said. Thank you, sir. All right. So that's arteries, veins, and capillaries. You guys should know for the rest of your life. You can forget a lot of stuff, but you should know what arteries, veins, and capillaries are for the rest of your life. It's considered common stuff. That, by the way, none of this is me speaking down to you. I just like to always give you like this is important because I think a lot of stuff we teach you in school is not, always super critical. Okay. So you don't have to memorize this. It'll be kind of obvious to you in some senses. But your cardiovascular system, one of its jobs is transportation, right? It is who's going to carry around the Amazon packages in your body. Like this is the system that floats them along your bloodstream and gets them to those cells, right? So they will carry gases, oxygen, CO2, nutrients and wastes, right? There's also white blood cells in your bloodstream which are meant to fight off disease, and you need that everywhere, right? So it is doing that too. So this is part of your defense system, even though we don't count it that way, but it is. And there's this beautiful thing too, that's where all your platelets are. Or thrombocytes. We'll get to that in a second. But platelets are the things that make your blood clot. It's one of the reasons why we call your blood connective tissue, is it does have a matrix in it that's just wet. And when that matrix dries, if you've ever gotten a really bad scab and you look at it, it looks kind of hairy. And I don't mean because there's hairs in there. I mean, it looks kind of matrixy when the scab really dries up there and you see a lot of it. And that is the platelets and everything sealing. You have a self-sealing system. I mean, I would love it in my house when some pipe was leaking. If I could be like, oh, don't worry, you know, my girlfriend said, could you fix that? I'd be like, don't worry about it. It'll self-seal. That'd be great. But we do have that with our bodies. We really do. And unless you have a really bad cut, you'll self-seal. You wrap something around it, you stop the immediate whatever, and the platelets fill in the whole thing, and it builds back up, and it's a self-sealing system. And it keeps you from bleeding out. Literally. It's kind of cool. Okay. I already said this, but the color of your blood depends, on its oxygen content. When blood has lots of oxygen, which you're used to seeing when you cut yourself or in some gory movie, it's always red because there's oxygen out here in the air. And the minute blood gets out in the air, it turns bright red, no matter where it comes from. So bright red means more oxygen. It tends to get very dark purple when it lacks oxygen. So, in fact, one of the very interesting things with top athletes is watching their blood return from areas of their body. So like top cyclists, the blood goes in there bright red and it comes out black because their muscles are so good at extracting every last bit of oxygen from it before they send it back to the heart. They're just highly efficient machines. Yeah. Cool. Over half your blood is plasma, which is essentially water. Over half your blood is plasma, which is essentially water. You make blood cells. I don't know if you guys remember this, but you remember the beautiful skeletal system? You remember how the long bones don't just hold you up, but they actually, in the bone marrow, produce something? You produce your blood cells. Red, white, and your blood clotting cells, platelets, which are also called thrombocytes, you produce all of those in your bone marrow, in your skeletal system. Still amazes me. And that's called hematopoiesis. I will not ask you to say this because I don't think you're going to need to say it in your lifetime, but hematopoiesis is the creation of blood cells. And it occurs inside your bones. Unbelievable. Your bones holding up your body right now said that's not enough. We're also going to create all your blood cells for you. Which strangely, by the way, go into your circulatory system and are used to bring back oxygen and stuff to your bones because your bones are alive. So your bones produce the very blood that they could not live without. It's kind of cool. And if you see down here, it says blood cells, and it says erythrocytes, leukocytes, and thrombocytes. This is an important distinction. Erythrocytes are red blood cells. They're what we think of as blood. They pick up oxygen, they pick up CO2, they move those gases around. Leukocytes are white blood cells. They kill bad guys. All day long. Kill them. By bad guys, by the way, I mean viruses, germs, bacteria. And thrombocytes are platelets. They are the guys that help clot areas for you, right? So if you ever heard of a hemophiliac? A hemophiliac is somebody without a very high level of platelets. And one of the dangers are, especially when they get surgery, is they can bleed out. They don't self-seal. And just stitching somebody up without self-sealing doesn't really work really well. They need to have some of their own self-sealing properties. And real hemophiliacs can be a real danger because if they get really injured, they can bleed internally. But that is a person who lacks thrombocytes in their blood. And so with hemophiliacs, by the way, before surgeries and stuff, they usually give them something called factor IX, which is full of thrombocytes. They kind of pump them back full of stuff that they need so they can seal up their body from all the stuff they're doing in surgery. Okay. So 8% of your body weight is blood. Kind of cool. Your blood plasma, of which is about half your blood, is mostly water. But it's got things in it like glucose, which is essentially sugar, right? It's got hormones, which Miss McDowell reminded us are chemical messengers before I even asked. I love that. And it's got clotting factors in it too, things that help it clot if you need it to, when it's exposed to air. And they will sometimes give you plasma, by the way, just to keep your blood pressure up, right? If you don't have blood volume going around, they'll give you some plasma just to kind of keep your blood volume up. Or if you're terribly dehydrated, they'll come give you plasma too. How are we doing on time? Let's take, hey, it's 4:30. I think we should take a break. I realize it's as unusual place in this presentation as any to take a break. So, let's continue our lively, thrilling discussion about the liquid substance of life itself, your blood. It's amazing. It really is amazing. I also don't understand how all this stuff, this has nothing to do with today's lecture. This is your teacher just geeking out. But like, how did it all come from like two little cells coming together? And how did they decide to divide? And then one side, and they make a little heart over here and other little things over here and toes. And how did they all figure all that out? I mean, it's really astounding. Yeah. I mean, I have a hard time changing the oil in my car, and something like made this incredible thing that does things and they all work together. And do you realize to be alive right now, your body has to be doing like a couple of 1,000,000 things correct right now? Right now. Yeah. And not only that, look at all the times you've worked against it. And by you, I mean me. But when we do stupid stuff and it still works. Yeah. Yeah. Like the half a chocolate cake you ate that you think none of us know about? Yeah. At midnight? Yeah. You chugged it down with a half gallon of milk, but you're still okay because your body took care of that. Yeah.
I ate the whole cake, Mr. Haslett.
You ate the whole cake, see? And you're still okay. I like that about you, sir, too, by the way. Because why stop? Once you've eaten half, you might as well just, eat the rest of the guilt away and just eat that cake. All right. Anyway, so we are back to blood. And there are 3 types of cells. I already told you. Don't get too caught up in this slide. Don't even worry about it. But there are red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. Red blood cells do the oxygen thing. White blood cells do the ha, ha. That's what I picture. White blood cells are very ninja-like. And ha, and they attack the bad guys. And then thrombocytes are your platelets. And they come in and they fill in all the holes that you make in your body when you're doing the stupid stuff I just talked about. Yes, Miss McDowell.
So I know that the white blood cells are kind of like the defender cells.
Very much so.
And I know that sometimes like red blood cells can like become deformed. Like those are cancer cells, right?
Sure.
When they do that,
Well,
what happens is those white blood cells, do they kill the cell?
Yes.
That is formed?
All right, so you're asking a perfectly, like a biology 101 question. It's a perfectly good question. It's just a complicated question because white blood cells, when we say white blood cells, we're actually talking about a whole bunch of different types of cells. So we're just talking like, it's kind of like us talking about the army, but we know not everybody in the army is an army man or woman. Like there's a demolition specialist and there's the machine gun person. Anyway, white blood cells are very much like that. So you have some cells though that are designed to do that. They're called killer cells. And they really do go out and kill other cells. And what's really interesting in your body is your own cells, when they notice that they're growing out of control, will sometimes send up kind of a signal to say, you got to kill us. Like we're out of control. They really do. They'll sacrifice themselves for the whole. Now, I don't know if the cell's thinking that way. I don't know what it's doing. But my point is your cells do recognize. Cancer, by the way, in and of itself is just your cells growing out of control. Like, in and of itself, it's just cell growth. There shouldn't be anything wrong with it, but they're going too fast. And they do recognize when that's abnormal, and they will set up a warning thing and be like, there's something wrong here. And these killer cells will come along and kill them. Yep. And you've got like macrophages that are giant eating cells that will actually kind of devour other cells and then disassemble them once they're inside them. Other ones, destroy them in other ways. Some of your cells are also some of your white blood cells are meant to learn. And they really do learn about essentially the protein makeup of the outside of foreign invaders, and they remember them so that they can spot them more clearly as a foreign invader next time. This is the whole reason that some of us are getting vaccinated, is the vaccine allows me to recognize the virus quicker so my body responds quicker and it knows what to kill quicker. Because the problem with viruses is viruses are dead and they actually invade your healthy cells and get them to produce more viruses. So if you can recognize that early on, you can nip it in the bud. It's just like the wanted posters in the Circle K, you walk in there, oh, Miss McDowell, we've seen you before. No, you go right out the door, right? So anyway, yeah, I hope that answers your question, but the white cells in many, many different ways protect you by identifying, remembering, killing, devouring, all that kind of stuff.
But it's not just for like blood. They can do that for like any system in the body if they see something that's like not.
Yeah. In fact, I would say that's more true. Like the blood system is just their way of traveling around, right? So your circulatory system is just getting the white blood cells to where they need to get to. It's probably not blood they're trying to get to. It's probably your toenail or your big toe or your fingers, some problem in that area. Yeah. In fact, we believe one of the reasons you swell when you get injured is because it pulls more of those platelets and white blood cells and stuff to that area. And it flushes it full of them and pumps it full of them in this big swollen area that's full of liquid, right? But that plasma has all these white blood cells in it and they can attack the area. Yeah, that's the idea. And kind of and by the way, the swelling keeps all the tissue opened up so blood can get in and out of there very easily. Swelling actually is, when it's temporary, it's a great thing. It's a great thing. Yeah. Cool. And there is a very good show that one of my other students told me about. It's an anime show. And she's right next door. I'm almost tempted to go ask her. Maybe I will when you guys work on your homework. But it's an anime show about like they've anthropomorphized. They've given human traits, thank you, to cells and stuff in your body, and they all kind of have these missions and stuff, and it's really fun after you've taken anatomy, because you're like, oh, the white blood cells are attacking the bad guys, and here's what they're doing. Anyway, the whole show is like that, and you learn all sorts of stuff about it, anatomy and physiology by watching the show. It's kind of fun. Yeah, I think it's on Netflix or Hulu. I'll find out. Yeah, okay, moving right along. Those are the three types of cells. Erythrocytes, which are red blood cells. It's a fancy name for red blood cells. Erythrocytes. Cytes is cells. Erythrocytes transport oxygen and carbon dioxide. We always talk about it as transporting oxygen, but they do transport carbon dioxide on purpose back out of your body, right? And they have something in them called hemoglobin, which binds very well with oxygen and carbon dioxide so it can be transported. It literally means that there's a little chemical reaction that comes along, and when it gets that oxygen, it locks it up for a second and then can transport it, release it later, and that's hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is iron-based. That's why sometimes they're like, oh, your iron's low, you need to eat more meat or take iron supplements or whatever. Their fear is that in those situations, you don't have enough iron to make your hemoglobin work, and you can have all the blood in the world. If it doesn't pick up oxygen very well, it's not doing a very good job. That's where that comes from. We don't have to worry about all this stuff. Let's go now to leukocytes. Leukocytes are your white blood cells. And they fight off infection. In fact, sometimes when you go to the doctor for a checkup or something, if they want to find out if you're sick, they actually check your white blood cell count. and because white blood cells increase rapidly when you're sick, which you want them to. But it's not a standing army. It calls a whole bunch, it creates an army when it sees an illness. So if your white blood cells are really high, it tells us you're fighting off an infection. Quite possibly effectively, but you're fighting off an infection. It's one of the things they look for. This is one of the advantages to your white blood cells or your leukocytes having encountered and remembered an enemy from before. It's one of the reasons that I will get sick less than some of you will who are younger. It's not because I am better, it's because I've probably caught most of the illnesses that you are still catching. There's about 160 varieties, give or take, of the common cold. At my age, I've probably caught all 160 varieties. But if you have 2-year-olds at your house, you'll know that they've only caught about 2, and you've got another 158 to go, which is why they're sick every 4 days or something. They are building up memories of these common cold things. Anyway, the advantage is when you've already caught this stuff, is that when I get a cold that comes along with something I've already had before, my white blood cells remember it, identify it quickly, multiply quickly, and kick its butt quickly. That's the concept. All right. That's leukocytes, white blood cells. Kind of cool. And then there's thrombocytes. Thrombocytes are platelets. They are platelets. They have a kind of a jagged shape, so they'll tend to fill in areas real nicely and kind of create a matrix in there. And they will dry when exposed to oxygen outside and such, and they will form a scab. They will also do this internally and keep you from bleeding out internally. And you guys have probably ruptured stuff internally in your bodies many, many times and never known it. Because the thrombocytes came along, sealed it up, and fixed it, and you were done. That's it. When you guys see a bruise, you've ruptured blood vessels underneath the surface of your skin. They're just probably capillaries, and they're pretty tiny. It's not a big deal. But your thrombocytes came in there, too, and sealed all that up. So it didn't keep slowly leaking out blood. Yeah? Just remember that blood, because of these thrombocytes, because of this matrix, your blood is considered connective tissue. Remember, there's 4 types of tissue in the body. Does anybody remember the 4 main types of tissue in the body? Anybody? For $10,000? Not for me. I'm a teacher. But somebody might. Well, the number 1 was connective tissue. It's the most common one in your body. Then there was epithelial tissue, which kind of covers the linings of things, the outsides of things. Nervous tissue, right, from your nervous system. And muscular tissue. Nervous, muscular, epithelial, and connective. Those are the 4 main tissue types in your body. Anyway, blood falls into the connective tissue type because it actually has a matrix in it and can become connective. Okay, that's kind of a pretty picture of clot formation. I like it. All right, we are not going to get into blood types heavily at all, but you do have different types of blood types. Part of the purpose is that your body can recognize foreign blood because it can see it as an invader. And so there are certain types that are more easily recognizable. And type O does not have any of these recognizable features. And so it doesn't show up as a foreign invader. So type O can be put into anybody's body and it doesn't set off alarms. That's why if you are a type O blood donor, just go to a blood donation place and tell them you're type O. And they just they'll roll out the red carpet for you. They would love to have you donate every time because it's gold. It's gold. I have a friend who's type O and it's funny. Just the reaction he gets when we donate blood. They're like, oh, type O. Anyway, A and B contain all of these kind of identifiers, and so they can receive anything, but they can't give to anything because they set off too many alarms. That's just kind of the concept there, and you don't have to worry about how all that works. But it really is from your defense system recognizing that, hey, this is not my blood. This blood is slightly different, and it's not mine, and you would want your defense mechanism to stop blood from somebody else's body coming into your body, unless you need a donation of blood. So that's when you need your blood to match. So, there is no blood type U. O. O, universal donor. AB, universal receiver. But O's the big one. And I think I just said this. Donors give, recipients receive. Universal donor is type A. Can give to anybody. Yeah. Okay. We talked about the heart. We said it is a 4-chambered pump, which means there are 4 chambers. The atria primes the ventricles send stuff off to the lungs or the body. There is a double-layered sac around the heart called the pericardium. And why would you need a double-layered sac around the heart? Like, are we worried about it leaking? So why are they double bagging the heart? Because that's what they're doing. Anybody? Friction. So one of the biggest problems of having your heart in your chest, it's right next to your lungs. And so if I, came up to one of you right now and creepily just stroked your face, right? I know, but this is a good example. Just stick with me, Miss McDowell. I know she's like, here we go again. But look, if I do this, this will be okay. But if I did this for 23 years, you'd bleed through your cheek. We'd have a hole in there eventually because of the friction. So your heart is inside your chest going ba-bum, ba-bum, ba-bum. It's rubbing up against everything. Well, just picture this for a second. If you put your fist inside a sandwich bag and then took another sandwich bag with a little bit of oil in it and stuck your fist in that, you'd have 2 sandwich bags with a little bit of oil between them, and then anything your fist did would just slide on by. And that's exactly what the pericardium does. Exactly. It is a bag wrapped with another bag with some serous fluid around them to help lubricate them so that your heart doesn't rub everything next to it. So maybe the inner bag rubs against the outer bag, but there's lubricant between them and they don't irritate each other. And they protect you from rubbing against the lungs, your sternum, all that stuff. That's what the pericardium does. It's a double-layered sac around your heart for friction purposes. Yeah, kind of cool. There are layers to the heart. You will never use this in your massage career. But it is on your test tonight, and it does make an interesting point because what was the top layer of skin called? Top layer of skin in your what?
The epidermis.
Epidermis. And the top layer of heart is epicardium. They're using the same thing. Epi means on top of. So it's the top layer. And endocardium, you'll see endo in a lot of stuff too. We've got endosteum and all these type of things that wrap around stuff. So this same type of language is used. Myo just means muscle. So myocardium is the middle layer, which is actually muscle. It's the muscular part of your heart. So you got 3 layers though, epicardium, myocardium, and endocardium. And again, I personally don't think you're ever going to use that terminology in your massage career. However, I would hope that you would remember from massage school, like, oh, cardium, cardio, heart, that kind of stuff. Epi, on top of that must be the first layer of the heart or whatever. That's the kind of stuff we kind of like you to stick in your brain. But does it make you a better massage therapist? Respectfully, no. I'm going to, you guys are going to have to look at your own charts. I hate to tell you if you want to look at some of the classifications of the valves and the atria and the ventricles and all that kind of stuff. You will notice this picture does not quite look like the one I put up on the board, right? Which is why I put the one up on the board that way. It's much harder to see in 3D. But I promise you it does work the same way. It's all true. It's just much harder to see it in an actual heart here. Because you are packed in really tight inside your chest. There is no wasted space in there. All right, so hopefully this is review now just from today, but hopefully this is review from the beginning of our discussion where we say that you have these 4 chambers. You have a right and left atria. They receive blood to prime the right and left ventricles. The right ventricle goes to the lungs, the left ventricle goes to the body. And look at this. The heart pumps about 1,900 gallons of blood a day. So you've all seen a gallon milk jug, right? The big ones with the handle. A gallon. 1,900. Almost 2,000 gallons with this guy. If I even told you you had to carry 2,000, your homework tonight is you have to carry 2,000 gallons of milk down the hallway, you would be like, I quit. And I wouldn't blame you. It is a tremendous feat. And guess what? It's not just did it today, it did it yesterday, the day before that. It's truly amazing, the workload of this incredible thing inside your body. They're going to talk to you in your book a little bit about the different types of valves that you have in your heart. They are not important for massage therapists. They're too internal. But you do have valves between all this stuff to make sure that, like, when the atrium pumps, you want to make sure that the blood goes down here. So you've got a one-way valve here that opens up and just lets blood in. And then it seals before it pumps back out there. Pumps are always made with one-way valves. So a one-way valve lets blood in to this chamber below it, closes up, and when it squeezes, this one-way valve lets blood out, but doesn't let it back up here because you don't ever want blood to flow back. So you've got all sorts of types of valves in your heart. And of course, they love to name them all. Let's move on along. Boom, boom. Heart rate. Average resting heart rate's about 50 to 80 beats a minute. That's not unusual. Gets about lower than 50, we start to worry a little bit, although some people live in the 40 range, especially if they're super healthy. Sometimes your heart does not have to beat that hard once you get really healthy because your system works so well that when you're not exercising, it's quite impressive. Your heartbeat, by the way, if you are a very healthy individual athlete, can go up to 200 beats a minute while you're exercising. That's not necessarily a bad thing. You'd need to be in top shape and fairly young, but you can do 200 beats a minute or darn close to it. We are not going to worry about all that stuff. And I already said this before, by the way, that essentially the top part of your heart beats first, and that's the two atria, and they're filling up the ventricles, and then the bottom two beat. So it goes lub-dub, lub-dub, lub-dub. That's actually where the sound comes from. Lub-dub, lub-dub, and the valves opening up and everything. Lub-dub. But it's really two pumps up here, right? Two atria, lub, filling up the dub, and then the two ventricles down here, dub, squeezing out to the body and the lungs. Okay. We also talked already, so hopefully this is review too, about the tubing that comes off. It is a pump. It literally is a liquid pump, and so your arteries and veins and capillaries are tubes. They are tubes, tubes, tubes. I can't emphasize that enough. I want you to picture tubes. The only difference is these are all wrapped in smooth muscle. Smooth muscle is one of the three muscles we study in the muscular system. We normally stick with skeletal muscle because it's how I move, do all this cool stuff. But smooth muscle, remember, was lining, for example, my entire digestive system. Remember how I used peristalsis to squeeze food through? Well, you have a smooth muscle around all your arteries and veins, especially your arteries. And here's what's kind of cool about that. Your body uses it constantly to regulate blood pressure and temperature. So, for example, if it senses that I am getting cold, one of the first things it will do is restrict blood to my arms and legs. Now, does that make my arms and legs warm up? No, it actually gets them colder. But my arms and legs can handle being colder. It's trying to keep my core temperature alive. And it literally is squeezing the pipes down. I've used this example before, but it's a great example. You know when you're taking your shower at your house that if somebody runs the dishwasher or flushes the toilet, all of a sudden the shower's too hot or too cold, right? This would be as though your house knew better and could actually expand pipes when you need them and contract them when you don't. Wouldn't that be lovely? And that does happen, by the way. When you're fight or flight mode, one of the things that adrenaline does is make sure to open up all the arteries to your limbs. because you might need to run with them, fight with them, climb with them, whatever. But again, 3 types of vessels: arteries, veins, capillaries. They're all tubes. They're all covered with smooth muscle. Arteries are going away from the heart, veins towards the heart, and capillaries are in between. Boom. 2 good words to know: hyperemia and ischemia. If you are in Mr. Barr's class, you probably have already heard the word hyperemia, I would guess. Oh, it's a good guess too. I love when I have a good guess. He's probably praising you when he says hyperemia, because hyperemia, hyper means above, right? It's an increased blood flow, and it's when we see somebody's skin getting really red from your rubbing, and it means you have successfully increased blood flow there. So you'll often hear somebody say, oh, that's great hyperemia. Really good hyperemia there. It's something in massage we're trying to produce in general is hyperemia. We want your skin to get red, not irritated red, but red from blood being brought up to the surface into that area. Ischemia is quite the opposite. Ischemia is what we're usually trying to fight in massage therapy, and that is low, decreased blood flow. So an area with extreme ischemia might look blue, for example. You know? So those are 2 good words to know as a massage therapist. You will hear other massage therapists talk about hyperemia, lots of blood, or ischemia, lack of blood. Yep. Miss Estes, what is, just did it, I'm sorry. What is hyperemia?
Fine. Hyperemia is when you see the blood coming to the surface.
Cool. And what's ischemia?
Yeah. That's opposite.
Thank you. Perfect.
So,
that's it.
yeah, I'm with you.
Beautiful.
I'm with you.
Yeah, no, I want to help. You were very kind. You left your camera on. You looked like you might be. I thought I'd pull you back in for a second. Yeah.
I love it. I'm absorbing.
Well, apparently you are. This might be good. Go back to sleep. You're doing great. All right. I already explained all this, but arteries are taking blood away from the heart from the left ventricle, and that's where you get a pulse from. That's the pulse, right? That's what you're feeling for. That's what, by the way, on the TV shows where they lean down on the person, they're like, oh, they're dead. By the way, that is not how it works at all. Trust me. On live people, you're usually like, you spend like 30 seconds just trying to find the thing. So don't be so sure they're dead. Anyway, it takes a little while. But that's the pulse. The pulse is coming from the left ventricle. Essentially, by the way, there's a big aorta that comes out the left ventricle, and it splits up into the upper half of your body and the lower half of your body, and then that all splits up and everything like that. It goes to the rest of your body. So, this is a very good picture of arteries in your body. These are obviously the big ones, just like the nervous system. There is no place in your body except your nail beds and your hair that doesn't have capillaries going to it. If this picture showed all the capillaries, you would not see the person. You'd just see an outline of red. They would look like roots everywhere. Capillaries have to go to everything. Remember, the cells can't get up and go get the blood. It's got to come to them and be right outside their doorstep. What I like about this picture is it shows you how essentially off that heart, it either goes down through what's called the abdominal aorta to the rest of your body, or it comes up and branches off to your head and your arms. All the blood coming out of your heart. That's the only reason I thought it was interesting. Okay. So, we talked about blood pressure a little bit, but you have 2 numbers in blood pressure. You have a systolic number over a diastolic number. I remember diastolic because if you guys remember numerators and denominators from fractions, denominators are on the bottom, right? I hope. Thank you. And diastolic starts with a D like denominator. Anyway, the diastolic is actually your lower, easier number. And it is a measurement of how well the tubing works when it's not under force. And it's actually a number we tend to care about more. But anyway, that's what systolic and diastolic means. The diastolic pressure tells me a lot more about your health than the systolic. Your resting blood pressure tells me a lot more about your health than when you're exercising, for example, and it's going through the roof anyway, and it should be sometimes. High blood pressure in the United States, and I say in the United States because there are other countries that are much healthier than we are, and they think our standard blood pressure is a bit high. But in the United States, 140 over 90 is considered hypertension. Don't forget the word hyper, because we use it in a lot of stuff, and hyper means crazy, hyper, running around, right? Hyper. Hypertension is high blood pressure, right? Hypo, like a hypodermic needle that goes underneath the dermis, hypo means low. That's low blood pressure. And this is one of Tapscott's big things that derivates from the general industry, which is I don't care too much about hypertension, even though it's on every massage questionnaire ever. And that's because not in my entire 30 years of doing massage have I heard somebody be like, oh God, if we would have only knew that they had high blood pressure, we could have saved this person. Because it doesn't happen. Not in massage. It does in personal training, it does in other things, but not in massage. Your blood pressure drops on the table. I care if you have low blood pressure. I don't care if you have high blood pressure. And again, I don't think you're going to die on my table. I care about you getting up and being lightheaded and passing out. So hypotension for me is actually a bigger concern. I'm not that concerned with either one, but if I'm concerned with any of them, I'm concerned with hypotension, low blood pressure. If I was your personal trainer, I'd be concerned with hypertension, because I don't want to push your high blood pressure too high while you're starting this new training routine, that kind of thing. That can be dangerous. But massage is not physically exerting for the client. It's physically exerting for the massage therapist. And capillaries are where they all come together. They're these single one cell walled things that are so small that blood can kind of leak out through them and other blood can get back into them. And they really are where the exchange takes place in the cell beds. Remember flower beds? They're cell beds where all this stuff, and these are your drip irrigation coming there. And the other ones, the artery capillaries are kind of, which is not a name, but the artery capillaries are coming in, leaving stuff here, and the vein capillaries are picking it up and taking it back to the heart. And that's how it works. And in between are where all the cells are, and they're soaking up those delicious nutrients, right? And dumping out anything they don't want for you to pick back up. But the whole way these guys work is they are really thin by the time they get down there. Really, really thin. After the arteries have turned into capillaries and other capillaries pick up your wasted, used blood, they go into veins. And veins return blood to the heart. Remember that? There is an interesting fact about veins that is also true about lymphatic vessels when we get to them. But, just really quickly, veins have to go uphill quite often. Not always, but they have to go uphill quite often and under pressure. So, they tend to have one-way valves built into them. And they do that so when the blood gets part way up, it doesn't come rushing back down to your feet. They're one-way valves. So once the blood gets up there part way, it'll stay there. And so the one-way valves help your body not have a pooling of all your blood. You wouldn't want 4 pints of blood in your ankles right now. You would notice. But what happens is, even though there's not a lot of pressure, the little bit that gets going gets sucked up to the next level and gets up there. Yeah. And we will talk about this more in lymphatic massage, where the one-way valves really matter to how we do lymphatic massage. But the point is they have one-way valves to make sure they keep going to the heart and don't go back in reverse direction. You don't want your vein system backing up. We believe, by the way, varicose veins, part of the problem with varicose veins is those valves are failing. And so the blood is pooling there and it's making the veins kind of expand and not in a good way. And that's why you see them. We think it's a failure of the one-way valves in part. So, let's talk about some of the ways you can increase venous return. One is massage. One is actually massaging towards the heart. That helps venous return. The other thing is called skeletal muscle pump. It's a muscle pump, and that is actually the concept that my skeletal muscles, especially like my calves and stuff, are actually, every time I use them, they're pressing, without realizing it because they're contracting, they're pressing against the veins, and that's helping push blood up into the next level of the one-way valve. And so one of the best things that you can do to prevent varicose veins is get up from your chair and walk around. Sitting actually with your legs hanging off the edge of the chair stops venous return. The edge of your chair is stopping it. And that's a problem. So getting up every once in a while and walking around causes your calf muscles to contract and work, and your other muscles, by the way, hamstrings, all sorts of stuff, and it helps venous return. In fact, this is so true that your soleus, which is one of your 3 calf muscles, remember the soleus, is also referred to as the second heart. I remember this by heart and soul, heart and soleus. Heart and soleus. But anyway, your soleus is your second heart because they really believe it's this big, thick muscle, and the action of you just walking around helps with venous return. We know other muscles do it too, but the soleus is considered to be so potent at that, it's called the second heart. And it's really, really helpful. Just simple walking does a big deal for venous return. So does massage, by the way. When people are bedridden, massage is one of the best things for them because it's helping with venous return and just getting stuff moving. Your bodies love to rest, but they don't like doing anything for too long a period of time. They don't want to rest all the time. They don't want to exercise all the time. They've got to switch it up. That is really the key. That is really the key. So, that's what a skeletal muscle pump is. It's just the action of your muscles working, and they actually help with venous return because all your veins and arteries are running right next to your muscles too, and some through them. But that's why it helps with all that good stuff. We don't have to get all of that. Let's talk about one other thing because it ties into hypotension. What is hypotension, Ms. Lobitz?
Low blood pressure?
Thank you. Low blood pressure.
Okay.
So there's something called orthostatic hypotension. And orthostatic essentially means your body not moving. So have you guys ever gotten up from something, or your friends gotten up from something, all of a sudden they're like, oh, dude, head rush, right? They get all, that is orthostatic hypotension. What it means is you were laying still and you got up very quickly and you induced a temporary state of low blood pressure. So orthostatic hypotension can be caused by just being still and then getting up really quickly. And again, I bring it up for the same reason that it causes people to pass out. And there's nothing wrong with them. We've all experienced that kind of, whoa, got up too quick. But that's the stuff, that's why I always tell my clients, please get up very slowly. Please sit there for a second. Let them give a chance to get their bearing because of orthostatic hypotension. And it happens very common from getting up from massage because your blood pressure is already low. Your therapist did an amazing job, got you all relaxed. You're in the parasympathetic state. Now you're like, oh my God, it's over and I've got to get my kids to soccer practice. And you hop up and you fall over. So just be aware of that. Orthostatic hypotension is the body not moving and then moving really quickly afterwards, and it creates low blood pressure temporarily. Not dangerous if you don't fall over. We're not going to worry about that. I think that might just be about it. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Do we also have, hold on one second, everybody. I want to see if they have major arteries. Yeah. Okay, total last thing here. Arteries and veins. You do have an ascending aorta coming off the left ventricle and a descending aorta coming off the left ventricle, which would make perfect sense. My heart, when it pumps, that left ventricle has to shoot blood out to my arms and my head. That's the ascending aorta. And down to my stomach, legs, everything else, and that's the descending aorta. They're just your big trunks coming off the heart, coming off all off the same place. And then you also have a returning veins, and you have an inferior vena cava, which is the vein from the entire bottom of your body. All these little things have come together in this big, thick vein, and it's going back up to get into your right atria. and you've got a superior vena cava, which is coming from your head and your arms to get back into your right atria. So these are just the big return tubes. You can actually feel the pulse in people's abdominal aorta really well. When we go in to work on iliopsoas work, if you go directly into the stomach, you can put your fingers right in the abdominal aorta and feel it pumping. It is one of the reasons, by the way, the abdominal aorta, which is below your heart, giving blood out to everything, and the inferior vena cava, the lower giant vein coming back to your heart, is one of the reasons why we don't want pregnant mothers to lay on their back when they get massage. Because the baby lays on the abdominal aorta and the inferior vena cava and crushes them between the baby and your spine. But the problem is that's the blood for you and the baby. And that's actually why we don't like pregnant women to lay on their back, even their stomach sometimes, depending on how they're doing it. But that's why. It's because of collapsing. It doesn't cause permanent damage to the aorta or the vena cava. They're strong. They're just tubes. They'll pop back up. But you are suffocating the baby and the mother. You are limiting their blood flow. That's why we do it, because of those. Because you are stopping the main stuff going out of the heart and the main stuff coming back into the heart. And that is it for that. Questions before I release homework and all that good stuff? Okay. Yeah, it was that good a presentation. Left you without a single thing to question your mind. I love that. All right, let's see here. You do have matching, quiz, and a test, I hate to tell you. Matching, a quiz, and a test. Okay.